China's agricultural land is shrinking fast. Sounds odd to hear that about a country that's busy greening deserts every year, but it's true. Turning deserts into farmland is a slow game, while degradation happens fast. For example, by the end of 2019, the total area of arable land was almost 494,000 square miles. Sounds like a lot, only sounds like it because in 2009 it was 6% more. What are the reasons? Rapid urbanization, growing industrial needs, poor use of farmland, intense pollution. But there's a quick fix, and it's kind of weird. The Chinese tossed crayfish into the fields, and with their claws snapping, they turn out to be a surprisingly great way to save China's agriculture. On top of that, these crustaceans are also helping a big part of China get out of poverty. So how did crayfish become unlikely heroes for China? Let's figure it out. So crayfish. More specifically, we're talking about red swamp crayfish, or Procambarus clarkii. They're probably not the first thing that comes to mind when you think of China, and for good reason. Up until around the mid-20th century, they basically didn't exist there, or at least no one had recorded that. Then came the Second Sino-Japanese War, which lasted from 1937 to 1945. At the time, red crayfish were sort of like pets for the Japanese. Apparently good ones, too, since beloved pets often tag along with their owners when they travel. That's how the crayfish ended up on the mainland, brought to China by the Japanese. And whatever the relationship between these two countries, the Chinese really ought to thank the Japanese for these creatures ending up there. Because since the early 90s, crayfish have been a Chinese culinary trend. In different parts of mainland China, crayfish are cooked in all kinds of ways. Spicy in some places, steamed in others, and sometimes soaked in wine. All in all, there are so many variations, it's hard to list them all, but one thing is for sure. China's now the biggest crayfish consumer in the world. Imagine this. The Chinese eat over 90% of all the crayfish that end up as food worldwide. That's over 1 million tons of crustaceans a year. With that kind of obsession, farming crayfish was pretty much inevitable. Not just red ones, but other species too, since lots of them can be used for food just the same. According to China's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Affairs, crustacean production was already at 265,000 tons back in 2007. Know how much it was 9 years later? As the same ministry says, by 2016, production had hit 850,000 tons. On top of that, another 49,000 tons of crayfish were caught in the wild that same year. There's newer data that shows even better that crayfish are taking over China. In 2022, the country produced 2.5 million tons of crustaceans. If you look at it in money terms, raising crayfish in China today is a business worth upwards of 369 billion yuan, or $53 billion. Let's go to Shuyi County in Jiangsu Province over in eastern China. This spot's known as China's crayfish capital for good reason, as there are tons of farms here breeding these critters. By 2025, the eco-friendly crayfish farming zone had grown to 1 million mu, or 165,000 acres. Meanwhile, more than 210,000 people in the county are employed in the crayfish farming business. Take Salt Lake City in the U.S., for example. It's the most populated city in the state of Utah. Even if its whole population suddenly took up crayfish farming, it still wouldn't be enough, since only about 200,000 people live there. Yeah, no wonder Shuyi's called the crayfish capital of China. By the way, people here have long been raising a species of crayfish that isn't really descended from the ones originally brought over from Japan. In Shuyi, they developed a new breed that grows bigger and reaches maturity faster. Naturally, this made the folks who earn a living from crayfish farming pretty happy. Some reports say this new type brings in an extra 500 yuan per mu. Here's another sign of just how deeply crustaceans are woven into China's life and economy. Yep, it's a statue. A record-breaking one, by the way, standing 49 feet tall and even listed in the Guinness Book of Records. You'll find it in an area that promotional brochures call the Eco City of Crayfish, or a tourist attraction that brings together food, education, and scenic views. To be more specific, we're talking about Hubei province and the city of Xiangjiang, also known as another capital of China's crayfish industry. At one of the plants here, 1,500 workers process 80 tons of crayfish during a 10-hour workday. And that's just one plant. The total number of farms in this city is mind-blowing. There are whole districts where you take a step one way, you see crayfish farming, a step the other way, same thing. Want some comparisons? Sure thing. If you pulled together all the crayfish farming spots in Xianjiang, you'd end up with a massive crayfish farm taking up half of Manhattan. In short, there are tons of crayfish in China, and they bring plenty of benefits too. They're food and money. No wonder they even get statues built in their honor. But their important role doesn't stop there. Remember what we mentioned in the beginning? Tossing crayfish into the fields? That's right, though of course it's much more complicated than that, and the actual name for it is way more complicated than just tossing crayfish into a rice field. What we're actually talking about is an integrated crayfish rice farming system. Here's the deal. Rice is grown in the field. Usually a circular ditch is made around it, and that's where the crayfish get released. After the harvest is gathered, there's a bunch of straw left behind and the field gets flooded. For tiny crayfish, straw is like a blanket for humans. It keeps the warmth in, helping the little creatures grow. Plus, those straw blankets make a pretty cozy home for them too, so the crayfish live in perfect conditions. And when rice grows back on the field, it gives the crayfish some great shade from the sun. Where do crayfish get their food? Well, they're scavengers. They eat pretty much anything they come across. Bits of plants, tiny living creatures, and what's called detritus. That's a mix of dead plant and animal plankton, organic waste, and debris. Straw left in rice fields breaks down, which helps plankton grow, and that's a great food source for crayfish. Plus, they love munching on the straw, which helps wipe out pests left in the field, and that means fewer of them next year. Pests are bad for rice, so even just this way, crayfish do a huge favor for the crops. The second benefit is the ability of crayfish to provide organic fertilizer for rice. How does this happen? Crayfish eat and digest food, which then turns into nutrients like organic carbon, potassium, and nitrogen. When crayfish die, they decompose and also become a source of all the good stuff plants need. So crayfish for rice is like a way to protect against the use of chemical fertilizers and pesticide spraying. This is really helpful because without chemicals, rice crops are less harmful to health. The increase in beneficial elements in the plants clearly reduces the need for various fertilizers and pesticide use. Specific studies on growing rice together with crayfish, for example, have been published in the Chinese Journal of Ecological Agriculture. Over the course of 10 years, from 2005 to 2015, a field experiment comparing the rice-crayfish system with the rice monoculture system was conducted. The results showed that the soil indeed had higher levels of carbon, potassium, and nitrogen. That's why rice yield increased by 9.5% compared to crops without crayfish. So crayfish are a truly effective way to boost the fertility of Chinese soils, which, due to various processes, have become less suitable for farming, particularly rice cultivation. It was also estimated that the integrated rice-crayfish system makes rice farming more profitable and economically beneficial. In Ducheng, Jiangxi, the rice and crayfish farming method brings local farmers a net income of 3,000 yuan or $439 per mu or 7,180 square feet. Doesn't that sound a bit surprising? Compared to traditional rice planting, this combined method brings at least twice the income. Why? First, with the mixed system, crayfish can actually be grown in rice fields, providing extra income. Second, the rice that grows alongside the crayfish becomes more expensive. The price for 2 pounds exceeds 20 yuan. Now we're heading back to Xianjiang, the very city that's called the capital of China's crayfish industry, the place where the giant crustacean statue from the Guinness World Record stands. Before 2014, local farmers alternated between rice growing and crayfish farming on their fields, and then they started using a mixed system. As a result, 93% of all farms switched to this method of farming. The Ministry of Agriculture's 2018 report showed that in 2017, crayfish production in the city doubled compared to the previous year, reaching 70,000 tons. If we sum it up, mixed farming is a great way to grow rice on less fertile soil and also make more money from the same fields. In general, it also increases the amount of rice and shrimp produced, since existing shrimp and rice farms can easily be converted into a mixed system. One could say this is a way to avoid a food shortage. A lot of positives. But actually, there are a few problems hidden here. First of all, growing rice and crayfish together is no easy task. It requires a fair amount of knowledge and skill, as well as an understanding of how not to ruin the harvest of the main Chinese crop. After all, crayfish, as a reminder, are creatures that eat just about anything, which means they might target the rice as well. Another problem is that winter crops are suffering. They are agricultural grains whose life cycle requires wintering. This includes wheat, barley, rye, and a few other less popular crops. Yes, in China, the main crop is rice. In 2024, the country produced 207.5 million tons of it. Meanwhile, wheat production in the same year was 140.1 million tons. It's hard to argue that the main ingredient in bread and many other products is a crucial part of China's food security. The growing demand for crayfish has led to wide trenches emerging on large areas of fertile land across the country. Seasonally flooded rice fields have turned into permanently flooded fields for crayfish farming. All this means one thing: there's less dry land for growing winter crops like wheat. For example, about 1,650,000 acres of rice and crayfish fields along the Yangtze River used to have half of the land traditionally used for growing winter wheat, but not anymore. And this is just one area. As you can see, rice and crayfish fields are now spread all over China, and their numbers keep growing. Looks like our video's missing something. Ah yes, you can grow ducks on rice fields. Why not? China, besides being the main producer of rice, has also found its place in duck farming. As of 2016, the global population of domestic ducks reached 1.24 billion, with 1.1 billion of them raised in Asia. By 2019, 80% of the world's duck population was raised in China. Raising such a large number of ducks became possible thanks to rice fields. The Chinese send the birds there to fatten them up. The fields are full of scattered rice grains, and there are also many pests and weeds growing. All of this serves as food for the ducks. The ducks eat and grow, and the need for herbicides on the rice fields decreases, saving money and labor on spraying, and also reducing harm to the environment. Plus, duck manure fertilizes the rice fields, lowering the need for artificial fertilizers, which again saves money and effort. But there's a problem with this because regular ducks don't really get what they can eat in a rice field that would please humans. That's why duck farming uses hybrid ducks like Ajamo, which have a mental block against eating rice plant leaves. Still, this doesn't cause any major issues overall, so the Chinese are actively developing duck rice farming. The most interesting thing is that sometimes ducks are added to the crayfish. Yes, to the same rice fields. Crustaceans tend to multiply really fast, which can cause certain problems. The Chinese thought, how can one control their population without harming anything else useful on the rice field? That's where ducks come in, as they eat up the excess small crayfish. What about rice? It's actually thriving with this new neighbor, since the crop now has soil that's way more suitable for growing and has twice the amount of nutrients. According to one of the companies that rolled out the scheme on its farms, it managed to boost the profit from one move from 800 yuan to about 1,500 yuan. It's reported that the main reason for the higher profits was an improvement in the quality of the crayfish, and also profits went up thanks to a big drop in spending on pesticides and herbicides. As they say, after the duck and crayfish system was introduced, they started buying nearly 70% less chemicals. Do you think the animals that the enterprising Chinese folks use in their farming have run out? Nope, we haven't even covered everyone with claws yet. Crabs are also actively raised in China's paddies. These creatures have been raised in China for over 70 years, and between 1990 and 1999 alone, production shot up 30 times, reaching 286,000 tons. The reason for this crab craze is simple. They're one of the most profitable aquaculture animals in China today. Among crabs, there's one especially remarkable species, Chinese mitten crabs, which are seen as pretty terrifying creatures. This furry clawed creature is among the world's top 100 most dangerous invasive alien species. They eat just about anything, can survive both on land and in fresh or salty water, and on top of that, they reproduce at an insane rate. Each female can lay from 250,000 to 1 million eggs in a single spawn. To get a sense of how dangerous this crab is, just take a look at this photo. What you see is a metal channel that traps migrating mitten crabs. It's a kind of defense people came up with for themselves. If there's no protection, the crab can easily sneak into people's homes and towns and cause a ton of damage to farming and everything else in its way, because these crabs eat everything. In China, just like with crayfish, they calmly let them loose on rice fields. The rice gives the crabs shelter, making life easier for them, and no one bothers them out there in the fields. There are no traps, no one's trying to catch every last one. Meanwhile, the crabs do their bit to help the rice feel better. Like we said, they eat just about everything. So much like crayfish, they cut down on weeds and fertilize the soil with their waste. This kind of co-farming makes farmers super happy. Some even report crab harvests of 660 to 992 pounds from just 2.5 acres. And all that in addition to the rice. Who else lives in the rice fields? Fish, of course. This system's been known for ages, thoroughly studied, and even officially recognized to the point that it became one of the first globally important agricultural heritage systems. Besides the fact that rice shades fish from the sun and underwater creatures eat pests and give nutrients to the crop, rice's neighbors help loosen the top layer of soil. Thanks to that, oxygen levels go up, which sparks microorganism activity. In this case, that activity means really useful work for the rice since it releases loads of nutrients along the way. Fish in rice fields also help with the mineralization of organic matter, optimizing the release of nutrients in the soil and the breakdown of fertilizers, which makes them more effective. Plus, rice roots grow better with fish than without them. Using waterfowl to grow rice, of course, also increases the profitability of the fields. In fact, net profit in different regions of China is 45 to 270% higher than when rice is grown as a monoculture. Looks like there's no need to worry about China. The country's handling food self-sufficiency and boosting the fertility of its fading lands in ways that seem unusual to many. And if problems come up in this area, no doubt it'll find someone else to plant next to the rice.